disciplinarianism just did not wash. And then over time, I built very good connections with some of these people, and then there's that. Then you go into that kind of relationship where it's not just about boss and manager and employee. It's more about the togetherness. And once you develop connections, then actually you're not just doing it because he's your boss. You're doing it because you've got a good relationship with him, and you've got a friendship with him perhaps. And I certainly relied heavily on that. Thankfully, I was able to spend the time to get to know my team and to socialize with them and interact with them. And I like to really use that loving kind of energy and use that to build kinship and morale. And I always found those were the best performing teams that I ever worked with, when there was that interactivity and a relationship.
Namaste, sweet souls. My name is Shilpa, and you're listening to the Omni Mindfulness Podcast. I am a mindset and meditation coach for professional women and mompreneurs. The purpose of this show is to offer stories and content that allows you to increase your awareness of your authentic self and be inspired by connecting to the personal and professional stories of other souls. Souls who are walking the walk and living everyday human experiences with inspired intentions. These are the stories that will expand your consciousness and spark within you to ask, what if? Each season, I offer content to help you create a holistic lifestyle that embodies spirituality, mindfulness, mindset, and energy awareness. Through my conversations with experts in their niche area and solo casts from yours truly, my intention is to help you holistically revitalize, reset, and relax your body, mind, and spirit. I'm your host and founder of Omni Mindfulness. So ask yourself, what if just one story could be the catalyst to shift the trajectory of my life? What if I become instrumental in serving other souls to realize their true self? And what if my soul's higher purpose is in the realization of Omni Mindfulness joy? It's never too late to rewrite your story. And now, today's episode. Welcome back, sweet souls. This is your host, Shilpa. I wanted to share some exciting news about a little challenge I'm running, as I'm trying to get more people to discover this podcast and the conversations that inspire those who value personal growth. And the best way to do that is to leave reviews. You can leave a review on Spotify, Google Podcast, or Apple Podcast. So my request to you is to leave a review if you feel that you've received any value at all from these episodes of Omni Mindfulness. It would mean so much to me if you could write a little review regarding any episode that resonated with you. Please take a screenshot of that review and email it to me at omnimindfulness@gmail.com. In return, I will offer you my one-page guide to spark your meditation practice through Sankalpa. Sankalpa is a Sanskrit word for intention setting. Along with this, you'll receive a link to my guided meditation that will guide you through an intention setting meditation, positive affirmations, which you can practice daily. I guarantee that this gift will help you start a daily intention setting practice with a spark. It is my gift for you for being a listener, being a supporter, and of course, to enable you to manifest the best meditation practice. And we are now in my 5th podcast season, exploring the topic of spirituality. Each month, my guest and I delve deeper. In January, we explore spiritual entrepreneurship. In February, spiritual leadership and wisdom. And wrapping up with spiritual awareness in March. Stay tuned. And up next is Priyank Patel. Priyank is a spiritual aspirant devoting his life purpose to his guru, Paramahansa Yogananda. He is from London and works as a chartered engineer. He is the co-host of the spiritual podcast Yogananda. His Yogananda Podcast connects seekers from all around the world in an engaging, relatable, and conversational style, focusing on the spiritual classic Autobiography of a Yogi, line by line. and the documentary movie Awake, the life of Yogananda, minute by minute. And now, here is Priyank. Thank you for being here, Priyank.
Absolute pleasure.
So, to segue now, spiritual leadership and wisdom. If you could share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I've been fortunate enough to lead some teams, and my thinking was that the high morale teams are usually the best performing teams, and the best way to produce morale is to have this strong kinship amongst and camaraderie amongst your team. And that kinship, I'm a very sociable person, so that I've really tried to use my strengths, as it were, and my in my engagements with my team. So that form of leadership, I've found to be the best way to do it. I mean, when I was young, I tried the disciplinarian method, and that was atrocious. It did not yield results. When I was 25, I was a maintenance manager, and most of the people that I was managing had had vastly more experience than myself. So that form of disciplinarianism just did not wash. And then over time, I built very good connections with some of these people, and then there's that. Then you go into that kind of relationship where it's not just about boss and manager and employee. It's more about the togetherness, and once you develop connections, then actually you're not just doing it because he's your boss. You're doing it because you've got a good relationship with him, and you've got a friendship with him, perhaps. And I certainly relied heavily on that. Thankfully, I was able to spend the time to get to know my team and to socialize with them and interact with them. And I like to really use that loving kind of energy, and use that to build kinship and morale. And I always found those were the best performing teams that I ever worked with, when there was that interactivity and a relationship with each of the team members.
Often I have found that when we learn to tap into the strengths of others, and not necessarily that there are weaknesses, but there are a facet of different skill sets we each bring to the table, and at different times, if we can tap into that and bring that out in others, that can help strengthen a team as well. Like you were saying, just building that camaraderie. And tying it back to Yogananda, when he started the organization Self-Realization Fellowship, perhaps let's take a step back. For those who are not familiar, maybe do you remember the date when the organization started?
Ooh, it would have been very 1920s.
Yes. And during that time, some of the early disciples who then may have become monks and nuns were part of this organization, where it was probably like a new business, like new personalities, and working with each one. And I believe that there is probably the intention by Guruji to bring out the best in each one.
Yeah, and this is the difference actually between, say, a Vivekananda and a Yogananda, because Vivekananda obviously created a storm in America by bringing yoga, into mainstream and speaking as eloquently as he did. I mean, if you go listen to Vivekananda's voice, you'll be astounded at his booming, flawless voice and his flawless accent. You just won't even imagine that he's Indian. So no wonder he had such a magnificent impact. And Guruji, but Vivekananda came and went, came as quickly as he went, as quickly as he came. But Yogananda came and he stayed, and, he created this organization. And as Shilpa mentioned, created these disciples, and really spent the time and invested invested himself completely into the West, and establishing yoga and going to doing these talks around America, going on tours and creating ashrams and monasteries and disciples all over America. So that was a difference, and he had to to be able to do that, I think, requires quite a lot of not just as your talk is spiritual wisdom and leadership, but he obviously we know that he was an avatar, which is a descent of divinity into flesh. So, but he certainly had his challenges. And if you watch the Awake, the Life of Yogananda film, you'll see the challenges that he had, and they're not dissimilar to how a business, the controversies of business would potentially go through legal cases and fallouts between members of staff, and HR issues that we all have had to pain and go through. So he had all these things, and the film does such a good job of portraying how an avatar goes about these problems. And often he did often give it to God. God, you put me here. You show me how to resolve this. You show me what I should do next. Should I go back to India and leave everything behind, or do you want me to stay on? And he would get the messages, he would get the signs, and God would speak to him saying, no, you have to carry on. I've put you here. The great ones have put you here. You are the one that's meant to be here. And we're very thankful that he did. There's so many yoga studios all around the US right now, and the UK. And if you work for a big company, there'll be no doubt doing classes every now and then on mindfulness and meditation classes, to help your concentration and all these soft skills. That this wouldn't have been the case if Yogananda didn't come and stay and do all, inspire all this wonderful research into the benefits of meditation and mindfulness and stillness, and spending that time working on yourself, as opposed to just going out and doing everything that you need to do.
Well, and given that, as you mentioned, he was a Maha-avatar, and so to juxtapose his leadership and wisdom to those that are perhaps, I would say, I don't want to say average humans, but a human who is on that path of being a leader or having wisdom, but the level of a tenacity it takes to do it, either as a Maha-avatar or a different soul, it requires so much of your own personal discipline, which he did have. And as you mentioned in Awake, he talked about he is going through the greatest challenges of his life. And that was coming from someone who left this impact, the greatest impact on the Western society, on yoga and meditation. Many of us would not have if it wasn't for him.
So. Often people think that if a great one such as a Vivekananda or a Buddha is born, then seeing as his mission is God ordained, there should be no difficulties. That is not the case. Anyone that even the greatest that have work to do, in this realm, have to go through their specific challenges. I mean, we need to look no further than Christ himself, right? His crucifixion. I was so shocked. Like because I'd been around Yogananda studies and teachings most of my life, but it wasn't until I watched Awake that I recognized behind the scenes there was tremendous challenges. And given that he had a higher force wisdom guiding him, and he even at times might have questioned it, but that wisdom led him to the fruition of what SRF is now. Absolutely. Yeah. Even Christ at the time of his crucifixion, he said, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? So he had his doubts. So that is the impact of Maya, that even a great soul such as Yogananda or Christ can has to go through their own trials and has to remind themselves of their divine purpose. And I think Often there's a beautiful word in Indian languages called Leela, which Shilpa, I'm sure you'll know what it means. But for other listeners, it's like this divine play, and we're actors. And Guruji had his own play, and he was an actor for his own play, and as was Christ, so he had his own Leela. And often the word Leela is associated with Krishna, most often because his Leelas were, absolutely immense and beautiful and mind blowing, and to derive meaning from them is a no mean feat. But the Leela that Guruji had often very clearly applies to us. Because when we doubt, we sometimes get depressed, or we might, get down or feel down, or if we're not experiencing what we should be experiencing in meditation, perhaps is this the right path for me, perhaps, or am I doing, does God even exist? All these things, if a Yogananda or a Christ experience them, then who are we? And we can take inspiration from the fact that is how strong the pull of Maya, or the delusive, or the energy that draws you away from God is, or your most true nature, if you don't like the word God. So we really should take inspiration from the fact that it's not an easy thing we're trying to overcome here, this inertia, and also the pull in both directions.
And that pull in both directions is what I remind myself, given that I was raised with this concept of Maya. So often when I am down on myself, I say, okay, this is Maya. There's duality here. It's the very nature. In fact, you probably remember Brother Anandamoy.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to attend his services when I was really young. And I remember, I know, I'll tell you more about that one.
So jealous.
He was awesome. And I remember either in the service I was in or some recording, but he talked about the nature of Maya. And these are not exactly articulated his words, but that it's mathematically impossible to experience this plane on a level where things are, I don't want to say perfect, but it's always pleasant. There's a duality with everything. So if there's something that is working in positive direction, maybe something else is tugging the other way.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, even if we wanted to, we couldn't we couldn't replicate Brother Anandamoy's speech and language. His accent was phenomenal as well, wasn't it?
I loved his accent. And that's one of the things, maybe I can tie this back to leadership and wisdom, is that within SRF, the services you listen to, like Brother Anandamoy's, there's always this beautiful undercurrent of humor that is reminding us of the Maya. And that is perhaps one of the things that I walk away with as what can a spiritual leader teach us, is that Guruji often says, don't take your role so seriously. And I often don't know what he means. I'm always like, well, what do you mean? but and there's a level of humor, and I'm sure you've noticed that among some of the monks.
It's a very sweet humor, isn't it? Especially the stories that the direct disciples of Yogananda relate. And Brother Anandamoy is probably the most case in point for that, isn't he? His stories are so childlike, his approach is so childlike, and it's so simple, and his language is so simple. There's no flowery language, there's no pretense. It's just he's just saying it as it is, as it's coming from his heart now, as he experienced it. But the humor element is certainly an important one, because that humor element, or that being able to laugh at yourself, is something that is, I think, an important quality, because failure, if you haven't failed, then you haven't set yourself high enough goals, right?
Exactly. So, yeah, and that was one of the lessons as a leader, is keeping that humility, that you may not necessarily label yourself as a spiritual leader, but a leader with good intentions, and having that humility and ability to just keep things a little more, I would say, some levity.
Absolutely.
I do remember one on Brother Nandamay's story that ties back to this leadership wisdom concept, and it is about trust. I remember, and again, hopefully I remember this story correctly, but there was a context in which Brother Nandamoy was angry with Guruji, or not angry, but was manifesting some frustration. And Guruji came to him and had a kind of a dialogue. And at some point, there was a snake, and he told Brother Nandamoy, "Go take that snake and toss it." And I think there was the lesson in it of trust. And I believe the way Brother articulated his story was far more humorous than I can remember. Let's just say that no normal person has the immediate trust to go grab a snake and do it. But
would you do it, Shilpa? If Guruji was
I stand 10 feet away. There's a snake. But he did it. And I look at a lot of these disciples that worked with him, and they put themselves in these conditions with acceptance, knowing that they could trust their guru, their leader.
Yeah, and it's no mean feat either to be in that state of consciousness where you can pick up that snake if your guru is like, if we had 10 devotees of Yogananda here, what would you say? One probably would actually carry out that action. Imagine if it was a cobra and his hood was up facing you. I mean, who would have that courage? So it's no, like, if in that story, if Anandamoy did he actually take the snake? He probably did, right? Yeah. So it's no ordinary soul. It's a challenging, and it's quite an achievement if you're at that state of unconditional trust and loyalty to God and gurus, if you can be that snake picker upper. It does require that strength, and that's a good analogy for life as well, because meditation is not easy, is it? Picking up that snake is not easy.
Snake. Meditation, like you were mentioning earlier, and for those who are not aware, within SRF we learn different meditation techniques, and it requires discipline, and it requires trust, and a lot of praying, because sometimes I struggle, because even though I try to do everything I'm told to do, there are days where I'm like, am I doing the breath work? I don't think I'm really present in the moment. I've held my breath for 2 minutes now.
Yeah, and the other one is the unconditional love element. And part of unconditional love, I don't know, Shilpa, if you're a mother, but I'm not a father. But I can imagine if I had a child, part of that is serving without any expectation of return, doing it because it needs doing, and meditating with that attitude. If you can really do that, I think you're probably 99.9% to the goal. But we all want these experiences. We all want this joy and the bliss that comes. But we have to work. We have a lot of baggage to work through before we get there.
And I think that ties back to the wisdom, because having that wisdom, it doesn't come overnight. It does require. I call it, you're chipping away. You're shaving off anything that you don't need and keeping what you can. But some of that also then gives you the ability to increase your perception as you chip away using these principles or techniques, whether it's from self-realization or others, that it changes your perception of who you are.
Yeah, well, if you keep chipping, what's there going to be left? You're just going to be a bare soul.
Yeah, hopefully, right?
And that's the goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Chip away at that ego slowly, and what's left is just a shining diamond.
And speaking of shining diamond, I do have one thing I'd like to kind of segue before we talk about our third topic, which is discussing Steve Jobs and minute 5. And I believe that the wisdom that we were speaking of, whether it may not have necessarily been for an organization spiritually, but it was for technology and innovation. But somehow he tapped into some of that wisdom. And as you may have heard, he made a dent in the universe.
Very good way of putting it. Yep.
So
Certainly did.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, he was certainly who was it? One of the brothers was talking about this in a recent talk. Steve Jobs
Mm-hmm.
phoned Mother Center for listeners. Mother Center is the headquarters of Self-Realization Fellowship, and he phoned and the receptionist picked up and he said, "Oh, can I speak to a minister?" And he said, "Yeah, who is it?" And she said, "Oh, it's Steve Jobs." And then so this person put it straight through, and then Steve Jobs said, after speaking to the brother, he said, I want to put the Autobiography of a Yogi on the iPhone or the iBooks on our iBooks store." And he's like, "How can I make that happen?" So these stories are known to Self-Realization Fellowship, but this is also about, we discussed earlier how how you keep some things close. I mean, if he did say to the world, "Oh, Yogananda is the way," this face, everyone look and put this face on your altar and meditate. He didn't do that. The business Apple would not be as successful as it is today. Probably the biggest company in the world by market cap. But he did do it in a subtle way, in a nuanced way, right? He put the book in his phone. He kept the book in his phone, and at his funeral, he distributed the book to everyone that attended the funeral. So these are subtle ways. And he said, actualize yourself. And what does that mean? That we in yoga parlance we have we say self-realize it, realize your true nature and all these things. But in programming we have actualize, self-actualizing yourself. We have people would understand that terminology much more, so he would use nuanced terminology like that. But the other way, I think he really did put his heart and soul into his products. And when I say heart and soul, I mean he connected to a very deep concept of a user experience, the idea, the optimum user experience. And he certainly would have got that inspiration from somewhere in the deep recesses of his intuitional awareness. And he has nailed it, right? Even the first iPhone, if you feel the user experience in that first iPhone, yeah, right, it may be much slower, but that is pretty much the same experience that all of our modern phones that right now are based on. So he connected so beautifully to it, and he was featured quite heavily in in various sections of the Awake film. It's quite nice that they included him.
And I'd like to segue that to the meditation aspect, is that he did meditate. He tied that in, and that enhanced his wisdom, whether it was intuitive, and then he would able to tap into things that most human beings probably take this for granted right now, and all the technologies and what comes with it. But his perception of not only the interface and the ability to connect to information, he didn't see it as hardware. He saw it as something that was more deeper.
Yeah, it kind of is solutions that take humanity forward, not just the share price, because Apple share prices, especially in the, before the last 20 years, it was all over the place, wasn't it? And he invested heavily in concepts that he knew were far ahead of their time, and it impacted his business negatively. And he had to leave Apple and things like that. So, but he believed, he had such a strong belief in what his purpose and what he's trying to achieve, that it transcends business, doesn't it? It transcends working for the share price or working for this corporation. And if you have that, if you can connect to something that profoundly, then the universe will usually unfold for you, right? It certainly did for Apple, right? It came back in, and look where it is now.
Well, certainly him reading the autobiography once a year every year, and having done that soul searching that he did, he may have been a fiercely passionate soul that not always came off very well, but he did leave a dent on so many levels. And that really ties back to something you were talking about, confidence and leadership, and having that. But also, do you recall the story of Yogananda trying to enter the ship when he was coming to America, and the confidence he needed for dealing with, I forget who it was who challenged him, and he had to look them in the eyes. Can you share?
Yeah, the visa, yeah. And the official for the guard, not the guard, the immigration guy. So he had that. So he had two challenges: one, getting the visa, and then second, the immigration, getting into the ship. And he had to, as Shilpa, you're saying, kind of looked him in the eye and didn't. His gaze was unwavering. And the guy let him in and let Strategist in to say goodbye, whereas all that stuff is usually like not allowed.
He had tremendous confidence, not only then, but at some point he was put in a position where most of us would melt on stage, and he was asked to deliver a talk. And maybe you could share that, and then we'll segue to
that's in the Autobiography of Yogi, that talk where he kind of froze. And which is interesting because he had the talk, the science of religion. He had the talk, so he knew what he knew what he needed to say in America, so he pretty much had to say what he would have said then. So he was on the ship, and he was eminent personality at the time, because he'd established a school, and he'd been invited to this Congress of World Religions in Boston, so on the city of Sparta, which was the ship, they invited him to speak, and he had never spoken in front of audience, certainly not an eminent audience that would have been on that ship. Maybe he would have spoken in front of schoolboys, because he'd had created his school at the time, but not a group of intellectuals such as those that had assembled there. And he froze. He completely.
Because he had to speak in English, correct?
That's also true, yeah. So, and he'd never spoken in English, and so he froze. He absolutely froze, and then he turned within, and he said, I think it's in the Autobiography, does it say 10 minutes or something of complete? I mean, when I first used to do presentations, like if I'm pausing I remember even like a couple of seconds, I used to think, no, I should be saying, and then I get exasperated because I've paused for a couple of seconds to think about something. So you just mumble on about something that doesn't make any relevant sense. But 10 minutes, he said 10 minutes of just standing in front of the audience. But then he let go of that consciousness of I, and the grander I. And the voice within said you can speak through Dishra's voice, probably, and then he switched into flawless English, and apparently he was so nervous that he didn't even recall what he talked about, but the other members of his ship said it was flawless talk in impeccable English, and it was a beautifully articulated science of yoga and things like that.
Well, that's what they call in our generation, flow. And having that trust in the wisdom, at some point, if you could tap into it, then you would become in flow state.
Yes, that's a good word.
Thanks again for tuning in. Check out the links in the description, and please subscribe, follow, and share, and continue to practice Omni Mindfulness.